So, hello and welcome back to the Journey Beyond Yourself Summit. Today we have the one and only Dr. Anita Nowak. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you, Sally, so much.
It's so nice to have you here and for you to give us some of your time. So I'm just going to read your bio and then we'll jump into empathy. So Dr. Nowak is an empathy expert, an award-winning educator at McGill University, and passionate about the next generation and leadership there. You're a fellow with the International Women's Forum and currently completing your first book, Purposeful Empathy, which I'm very excited about. I know that you've had lots of leadership roles in higher education, focusing on social innovation. And for the past decade, you've taught at the Faculty of Management with courses including leadership, social entrepreneurship and innovation, and managing for impact. You were named Professor of the Year in 2014 and 2019, which is huge. Congratulations. I know that you're also a certified coach and the co-founder of PVM Studio, an international advisory firm dedicated to supporting purpose-driven family offices, foundations, and companies. You are a multiple TEDx speaker with over 100,000 views, and I recommend everybody watch your TEDx talks because they are so important for humanity, I think, and also beautifully presented and brilliant. And you host a podcast and a YouTube series called Purposeful Empathy too. So we are so lucky to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Sally. I love what you're doing with this summit. And when I hear a bio read out to me like that, it just sounds like I'm getting older and older.
Well, you know, only a number, isn't it? You're looking amazing and your work is amazing. So it's all good. So there's so much I want to talk to you about. And let's start at the beginning by defining empathy, because it's something we talk a little bit about, we talk about it a lot, don't we? And there's various ways in which it's talked about. So I would love you as a professional to define what you mean by empathy. And then, if you wouldn't mind, giving us the lowdown on why on earth it's so important and why you've dedicated your life to it.
Yeah, sure. So you're right. Empathy is a really big word these days, you know, whether it's the federal elections in the United States where empathy featured, in neuroscience and psychology and leadership, business, like leadership is a big deal these days, and it should be, but it's a misunderstood term. So there's a couple of ways that I unpack it, and then I'm happy to share sort of my definition of empathy. The first thing that I think is important to know about empathy is it's different from other words that are treated as synonyms. So I have them on a continuum. On one side is pity, sympathy, compassion, and then empathy.
Right.
And on the pity side of the continuum, there's a power differential. When you pity somebody, there's power asymmetry embedded in the relationship. You look down on, oh, you poor person.
Yep.
But as you make your way across the continuum and you get to empathy, that's when there's a recognition that we share a common humanity. So, you know, when you're empathizing, there is this understanding that while we live different experiences and may not truly know what someone else is experiencing, we still have this, you know, fundamental humanity in common. So that's one frame.
Yeah.
The other important thing to know about empathy from my perspective is that there are two phenomena to empathy that are both important. One is affective empathy. So that's a technical term, but it basically just means when you feel what someone else is feeling. Like, you know, when you hear a story that's touching or you're moved by something, your mirror neurons are firing and you're reacting with emotion spontaneously. So you don't control affective empathy.
Yeah.
Cognitive empathy, on the other hand, is the capacity that we all have to imagine what someone else is experiencing, or to imagine what we would feel like in that circumstance. So it's taking an imaginative leap of faith, and we control that.
Yeah.
And that's an important distinction for me. And so the definition that I use for empathy is that it's the innate trait that unites us in our common humanity without discounting lived experience. So that's kind of important.
Yeah, and I also love that you've dropped in there the difference between sympathy and empathy, because I think that's really important too, and commonly misunderstood, like interchangeable, often where they're not, they're quite different. Yeah, and I love that. So effective empathy is kind of intrinsic in us, whereas cognitive empathy is a skill that we use to try and imagine how it would be for someone else.
Yep.
And why is it important?
So if you think about everything that's going on in the world today, everything from climate change and what we're seeing play out thanks to COVID in terms of inequalities and, how some people are, benefiting even from COVID, right? People are getting richer in some circumstances thanks to COVID. But we're also seeing how there's systemic inequalities and different systems as a result of COVID being right front and center, but not just sort of on global level of climate change and inequalities. We're also experiencing across the globe an increase in anxiety and depression, suicide, self-harm. All of these mental health issues are really, on the uptick, because we're not living in a society that is organized to optimize our well-being and our flourishing. And so I believe that empathy on purpose can be leveraged to help move the needle on a lot of the social and environmental issues that we're facing today. And empathy is available to us. We're born with the capacity to empathize. We can become more empathic with practice. And there's so many places in which we could turn up the volume on our empathic proclivity, whether it's at work, whether it's in the home environment, whether it's in our community, whether it's in our politics. It's available to us if only we were to do it. And so I think that's a really important message, that we can become more empathic with practice, and we should, especially in the face of all of these social issues.
Yes. And I mean, it's the thing that makes us human, right? And I know you've had a lot to say about tech and the world of AI and where that's going, and we know that we're not going to get more intelligent than AI, but what we have is this ability to innately connect with another human being, and those kind of values are so important now, as you said, with all of these things going on, but also in the future. I'm sure that we would agree on this, that we've got to start teaching it to our kids now. Like, what values do we want them to have in the future? There's no point them competing with machines that can do things faster and better and more accurately than them, but that human ability to understand another and therefore want to be able to help and care and act together as a community is so important, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. There's so much to respond to. I just had a conversation with a woman in New Zealand named Catherine Pavlovich, and she teaches in a faculty of management. But the way I came to know about her is through an article she wrote called Quantum Empathy, and it was published in a journal of management and spirituality, which I just found sort of like very avant-garde. And we were unpacking what quantum physics is all about, this idea of entanglement and this idea of interdependence. And somehow intuitively as human beings, we know that we're part of one.
Yes.
We know that we're interdependent, but our egos and the systems of our society are doing a good job helping us forget that.
Yeah.
Right. So we're like going about our days in our own little lives, feeling stressed about the world, and we're not kind of sinking into what is available to us if we kind of allow ourselves to harmonize with the oneness and the interdependence that exists. And in the conversation that we had with her, she was saying just a simple act of like 10-15 minutes of daily contemplation, sitting in silence, stillness, meditation, whatever word you want to call it, just opens up the opportunity for us to be in resonance with that oneness and interdependence. And when we do, there's just so much more that opens up for us. So I think the potential is huge.
Yeah, you're reminding me of what was Einstein's quote about this. We are delusional because we think that we're separate.
That's
Um,
right.
absolutely. And just I think, yeah, echoing what you've just said, the way we are at the moment, there's so much separatism, there's so much division because we're in these stress hormones. We're so concerned about ourselves and what we have and what we're going to lose, and that it just, it's the antidote, isn't it? When we're in fight or flight, it's not a time to contemplate how one another feel. But when we feel safe and secure and out of those stress emotions, then we can connect and literally open up and expand to one another and to, the higher, the greater, the universe, the frequencies, the quantum. Yeah.
And it's so good for us as human beings to be in a state of kind of homeostasis. Like I was having another conversation with a neurophysiologist a couple of days ago here based in Tbilisi, and she was sharing, she's an expert on self-regulation, which I interpreted as like you regulate yourself. So it's like a self-control thing, but she totally debunked that. She said, as human bodies, we have systems that regulate our body into optimal state all the time that are functioning behind the scenes, right? So if let's say our typical temperature is 37 degrees centigrade. If we go outside and it's really, really hot, we'll start to sweat, and that's our body self-regulating. If we go outside and it's really, really cold, our teeth will chatter and we'll start to shiver, and that's also to kind of keep us in optimal state. We have so many triggers in our society now, so many stressors that we're constantly fighting to self-regulate. Our body's constantly fighting to self-regulate. And the opportunity exists for us to be in optimal health when we do things like meditate, but also when we extend an empathic embrace. Because there's research that shows when we are being empathic, our blood, our heart rate stabilize, our immune system functions better. Like there's just so much physiological benefit that comes from empathy. There's research that's showing that, to our brains, an empathic embrace is no different than being on the high of psychedelic drugs or, post-coital kind of moment, right? Like our brains feel a sense of joy. All of the endorphins are released. So yeah, I feel like it's good for society. There's so much good that can come of it, but so much good for us also as people.
Yeah, and it has to start there, right? It has to start with the individual to then reach the societal level. So this is awesome. I'm really interested into how and kind of why, but maybe the how you got into, deciding to dedicate your life to this particular area. Like, how did you decide to study empathy? Is there a backstory?
Yeah, well, I have to give credit. No, it's a great question because it gives me the opportunity to say thank you to my PhD thesis supervisor, Michael Huxman. When I started my PhD in 2004, I was working on a completely different topic. I was interested in media literacy. How do you teach young people to read the media with a critical eye?
Wow.
And I'd finished my comprehensive exams, I'd finished my coursework. And so I was sort of like at the midway point of the degree. And I took a year off for professional purposes, right? I got a new job and I said to him, there's no way I can do both. And he said, oh my gosh, Anita, if you take a year off, you'll never come back and you'll never finish your degree. And I said, no, I promise I will. And he said, okay, well, come see me in a few months. I just want to check in with you, see if everything's okay. So I come into this meeting, so now we'd be like 2008, around springtime with no agenda. And he says, what's new? And that summer I was going with my sister to Kigali, Rwanda. We had done some fundraising to help a women's group. So this is like a group of women that are all survivors of the genocide, help them launch a microfinance project.
Right.
And I told him about this and I got really excited. And he said to me, Anita, I want you to change your thesis topic. And I was totally astounded. And he said, look, I just heard you talk about your trip to Rwanda. You got all lit up like a Christmas tree. You need to have that kind of passion for your own topic if you're going to finish. So the advice he gave me, which I share with my students, is go home to the box or the drawer or the folder that you stash stuff into without paying attention.
Yeah.
Go excavate find out what's there and see what your real passion is about. And I remember leaving
Love
his
that.
office. I mean, great advice, but my ego totally got in the way because I was like, how dare he tell me what I'm passionate about? But fast forward 2 weeks later, I have an old-fashioned metal filing cabinet, 2 drawers. I opened it up and I got past the taxes and I discovered, no joke, a miscellaneous file.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't even know I had a miscellaneous file. So I spread everything onto my dining room table and I said, okay, prove to me I have this other passion that I am unaware of. And initially I didn't really see anything. Like I had stubs to conferences, I had some notes, I had some articles cut out from the newspaper. And then I came across this little clipping about a boy that was in elementary school and had learned about childhood poverty. And that there are some kids that don't wear shoes because they don't own shoes.
Yes.
So he decided for a week, he was going to go to school with no shoes to know what that felt like and to teach his classmates about childhood poverty. And I get a little goosebumps just even remembering that clipping, because that's when I started to notice I was just naturally attracted to people who wanted to create some kind of change in the world.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, for my thesis topic, interviewing dozens of social entrepreneurs from around the world, these change makers that were devoting their lives to creating positive change in the world. I wanted to understand, what was it that animated them? Why did they choose to spend their time and energy on change-making efforts? And it all came down to this idea of having empathy for others and needing to act on it. Like they just felt a compulsion to act on it. So that got me down the rabbit's hole of empathy, and I've been passionate and excited about empathy for the last decade. And now I put like a little emphasis on purposeful empathy, because as I mentioned at the beginning, there's one kind of empathy where it happens to us naturally. We're just responsive, like in this kind of emotional contagion. But the other kind of empathy is like us deciding to be empathic and extend empathy for others. And I think that there's a lot of potential around public policy, around activism, around how we show up in the world, and how we can improve our own lives by leveraging this purposeful empathy.
Yeah, super cool. And that's going to be your book, Purposeful Empathy. Yeah, very cool. So let me put you on the spotlight and say, you've had 10 years now, maybe more of studying. What have you learned? Give us 10 years in. How long have we got? Can you give us a synopsis of the big highlights, the big aha moments that you've come across that is useful to others? That's the purpose here, right? Is to be, how can we do this? How is it important? What have you learned?
Well, one important thing is that we can become more empathic with practice.
Yes.
And that has to do with our neural plasticity. And just like, you go to the gym and you do bicep curls, right? Your bicep bulks up.
Yeah.
Because of our neuroplasticity, we can change the synaptic connections in our brains by thinking more empathic thoughts and behaving in more empathic ways. And I remember when I first started like exploring the neuroscience of empathy and neuroplasticity in particular, I started to do little experiments. And I remember one moment in particular where it was like the holiday season in December. I was waiting in a lineup at FedEx, and this is before phones where we had like a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been waiting for 30 minutes in line, tired, everybody's frustrated, bored, blah, blah, blah. I get up to the counter to mail my package, and the woman who was at the counter was really exceedingly and unnecessarily rude. And you can immediately react to that, right? By like one-upping as the customer and blah, 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 give me your manager, I don't want to deal with you, la, la, la. But because all of this like neuroscience around empathy was very salient to me, I thought, oh, this is a moment where I could practice empathy. So I got still and I asked her sincerely, are you okay?
Yeah.
And it took her the nanosecond to realize I wasn't being sarcastic. I was being genuine. And in that moment, what opened up for her was the opportunity to just share what she was living. She burst into tears. She said, I've been working double shifts for 2 weeks. My son is at home with a fever. I'm starting to get sick. It's 3 p.m. I haven't had lunch. I'm starving. And all of this like stuff came purging out.
And it made her so human to me. And I wasn't upset that she'd been rude. I felt nothing but empathy for her.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I've learned is that there are opportunities for us to practice empathy all the time. And when we are most triggered by some stimulus, that provides us the biggest opportunity to actually move the needle. If you'll indulge another anecdote, I remember working out of a building when I was doing my PhD in the Faculty of Education at McGill. There was one side of the street that had free parking with no meters. If you arrived just before 9 a.m., you could park for free all day long. So I got the second to last spot, and I was saving the last spot for my sister because she was going to park behind me. She had, so she was on her way. And so I physically got out of my car and stood in the spot for her, holding it for her. And somebody turned around, drove up the street, and it was like a Monday morning. This is like not even 9 a.m. And the woman rolled down her window, and that ages me. She probably pressed a little button and buzzed it. She started yelling at me, but it was not just like, get out of the way. It was like putrid, toxic venom, like swearing at me, like in a way that I've never been sworn at before. And she so shook me up. Like she literally scared me. I got out of the spot, and I remember saying just under my breath, "Is this who you are on a Monday morning?" And I walked back to my car, sat in my car, and I was shaking. I was trying to read the newspaper, shaking. And then all of a sudden I felt her body and my peripheral vision, and she was motioning me to get out of the car. And I was like, oh my God, now she wants to like accost me. And I don't know what possessed me to actually get out of the car, but I got out of the car, and she held my wrists and she said, "That's not who I am on a Monday morning." And she apologized. And again, we were like embraced. We were perfect strangers. And she went home that night and shared that story with her husband. And the two of them had such a deep dialogue that evening that they made the decision that day that they were going to move back to where they came from, which was like Eastern Canada, because this big city wasn't right for them. It wasn't bringing out the best in them. And so I think that there's opportunities for us to release space for us to be human in all our complex myriad forms, and we all benefit from it.
Yes.
So those would be some big takeaways. I also think that I used to believe that being empathic was all about the generosity of giving the empathy, and that the benefit was on the recipient end. If you empathize with someone, they feel better for it. And you can leverage empathy like all those social entrepreneurs I talked about. But I also have come to realize that it's such a self-fulfilling win-win that when you do empathize, that you win as well. And the more recent work that I've been doing around purposeful empathy has taken me into positive psychology. I've explored the work of, Maslow and his hierarchy of needs. And one thing that I've discovered, which I'm happy to share with anybody who's part of the summit, is, we all remember the triangle, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and we all remember self-actualization being at the top. And this summit is all about becoming your best self, right? So I believe that there's absolute value in finding all of the tools and resources that allow us to self-actualize. But what I learned recently is that Maslow, just before he died, wrote copious notes that never got published, so it's not very well known, where he actually says, hey, guess what? Self-actualization is not the best that we can be. There's actually more available to us, and that is self-transcendence.
Yes.
And that's taking all of our innate gifts and tools and actually being of service to others. And that allows us to really live all that is possible for us as humans. So that's another thing I've learned over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I love that you've brought that in, because absolutely. And there's so many people now kind of saying, what's the highest purpose? And I love that you say, because it's linked into this win-win situation when we it's not that we give empathy, but when we are empathetic, that it has that physiological response on us. We have those neurotransmitters activated. We have all those good feeling chemicals raging around our nervous system that make us feel good. And, that our purpose is to help others. Like, we're not in this alone. We're not a silo. We're not living in a vacuum. We're in this together. And there's all the studies now, isn't there, about what it does to you when you help others. So I love that. And thank you for your anecdotes. That's brilliant. And it reminds me as well, it's so important. I love that you also, I try and do this, like turn the things that are difficult into opportunities. And that's what this year has been. The year of COVID has been for many people, right? It's like just giving us opportunities to go within and transcend where we were. And I also think such an important point that you touched on, which is, and you said in your first anecdote, when, with the lady in the post office, you stopped and paused, and then you asked. And that's so important, isn't it? Because in the whole, how do you be more empathetic? Like, how do we become more empathetic? We can't do it when we're rushing around and or living in stress or fear. We can't do it. So there's here in Australia, there's a lot of "G'day, how are you?" as you walk by, which is completely different to stopping, going within, as you did, getting still within and tuning into her and then asking. She knows the difference between how you asked and how you alluded to, it could have come across as sarcastic or not from a place of heart, but also it could have come across as, that we all say to one another, "Hey, how you going? Hey," but we don't really stop and listen to the answer. And we all have this experience in life. I teach, but this is a segue, but I teach this little bit to teachers in schools, and we talk about listening and active listening and the difference that it makes. And we all know this when someone asks you a question and doesn't really want to know the answer versus when someone asks you a question and genuinely feels you and wants you to be seen and heard. And you can't do that until you've gone within. So I love that you've brought that, because you can't be empathetic with your own shit going on. Like, you've got to put that aside for a second.
And because our brains are always working, we got the little monkey brain going on, we are so poor at listening that even when especially if we're triggered, if our emotions are charged, then it's even worse. And you know that from personal experience, right? If you have a fight with your sibling, your mate, your partner, your child, you don't think in a very compassionate, empathic way, right? You're reacting. But even in general conversations, like I've taken a course where you can Google it through the, I think, International Center for Developing a Culture of Empathy. Edwin Ruch in California is spearheading this, and he's training people to facilitate empathy circles. And so I had to participate before I became a facilitator. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be simple, right? We're 5 or 6 people on a Zoom call. He was doing it long before, COVID and Zoom became the norm. So people in a circle, and in that circle of 5 or 6 people, there's pairings, and you keep moving around the circle in different pairs where one person is speaking and one person is listening. And the person says a few things, like a couple of sentences, and the listener reflects back. Not verbatim, so you're not busy trying to memorize what they said, and you're not adding your own commentary to it. You're not judging what they say. You're just reflecting back the spirit of what they said.
Yes.
And you do that for 5 minutes, and then it moves to the next pair and the next pair and the next pair. And I remember thinking, oh, this is gonna be so easy, right? I know how to listen.
Yeah.
But it is really hard to stay present to what someone else is saying without being in your own mind about how you interpret that or how you think about the situation. So I think one of the core skills that we need to develop to become more empathic is the ability to listen. So I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Or another big one is thinking of a time, because naturally we make associations with our brain. So if you say to me, I did this actually, when you said, I went into the post office and this lady was so rude, I was then thinking of the lady in the ice cream shop that we go to sometimes. It's incredibly rude. And then you're caught up in your own story unless you catch yourself and bring yourself back to what you're saying. So yeah, it's a skill, isn't it? It's a skill. And I love that, earlier on you said one of the big takeaways and the big learning is that empathy is a skill, so we can learn to improve it. We all can. So I think that's really important too, because some people might think, there's a lot of talk nowadays about being an empath, which I know is different, than what we're talking about here. But I think it encourages people to either think, I can do that or I can't do it. I'm not that kind of person. I don't do that. Whereas the message here is we're all born with this intrinsic ability to attune to one another. And there's so much science about the different ways that we do that, such as the mirror neurons you've already mentioned, the emotion contagion you've already mentioned, like all of this stuff going on. And we've just kind of lost our attunement because we're so busy and self-absorbed. I mean, I'm maybe making light of a complicated subject, but essentially, and so we have to stop and go within and pay attention, and we can learn these things. Just as you've just said, we all listen, but do we actually listen without judging the person in front of us, or thinking about our shopping list, or thinking about a time that something similar happened to us and how we would react and why did they react, and just getting caught in our own story? So yeah, I love this. So do you teach, your book's coming out, but do you teach, well, you've just told us, yes, you're involved in this circle now where you're teaching others how to become more empathetic. So you're teaching these skills. So can I ask you, as we kind of draw to an end, I'd love to know, with all, you've coming up for 15 years of experience and research in this area, what would be the one thing that people can take away from this area and implement today that will make a difference in their life? So, that might be empathy specific, as we're talking about. What's one practical thing that somebody can take away and do?
Okay, well, if you'll indulge, I have two that come up.
Yes, right away. I love that. You can have three if you like. I just didn't want to make it too many. You can have 10 if you like.
One is, and I really encourage anybody who's watching, as weird as this sounds, to practice the simple act of eye gazing. You put on a little timer, those little sand timers of 3 minutes and your eggs are, or you put on your phone for 2 minutes, sit facing somebody with your knees at a 90-degree angle and your hands on purpose facing up so that you're in an open stance and your feet are flat on the ground. And you just gaze into someone else's eyes for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And the only rule is that there's no talking.
Yeah.
So there may be giggling.
Yeah.
All sorts of feelings are going to be aroused.
Yeah.
But if you give yourself permission, if you push through how vulnerable the process is, because you really do feel vulnerable, if you push through that discomfort, it's amazing how much you can experience and feel in those 2 minutes. And there's research that shows that if people do that before they're going to have an important conversation, the outcome of the conversation is infinitely better than without. So that's one practice that I really recommend. Do it with your kids, do it with your maid, do it with your colleagues. It's very strange. I do it with my students, and I can tell you, everybody's kind of giggling, it has the jitters, but then they come out and they're wiping their tears away. They're like, I don't remember the last time I saw someone. I don't remember the last time I felt seen. We communicated, we became friends. Like, I know so much about them now in 2 little minutes of eye-gazing. So that's one.
I have to jump in there because I'm so glad that you've brought that. I'd forgotten about eye gazing, and especially as we're all in, looking down and looking at a screen, like, so important. I'd love to know if you'd seen a difference with your students over the past 10 years, but it is, you can't eye gaze and not feel seen and heard. And I bet there's a whole heap of people out there who've never experienced, well, for a long time experienced being seen and heard. And before you answer that question, we went to an art exhibition from Marina Abramovich a few years ago, who did just this as one of her installations. And it was also fascinating to watch, because there's a cue to do, but brilliant, because I'd forgotten about it as a human interaction connection exercise, and then to see it as an installation. I mean, what a woman, because it's also a fascinating, why is it in an art exhibition? Well, how can you you're learning so much. You're learning so much from another human being, and we don't take the time to do that, do we? Yeah, I reckon if we all did that every day, that you'd change the world with just that one.
That one thing. And you mentioned this art installation. There's actually an amazing YouTube clip that runs about 4 or 5 minutes where and it's gone viral, like 30
Her
million people
ex-lover.
have seen it. Yeah, her ex-lover surprises her because it's random people in line and she just kind of centers herself and then does an eye gaze and then it's the next person, but then it's her ex-lover. And it's so evocative and so goosebump inducing. So yeah, I recommend that your viewers watch that.
Yes. Yeah.
But
How can you not experience some degree of empathy watching that with how they're feeling? I'll drop it under this video. Yeah, great idea.
Wonderful. And one of the things that I learned about how we as humans evolved, because some 20,000 years ago, there were about 5 other creatures roaming the planet with large brains like Homo sapiens, but we're the ones who survived and thrived. And part of the reason is due to our empathic proclivity, because we've always had to be attuned with one another. It's a good word that you used earlier. And we developed whites in our eyes so that we could actually see how, respond to each other's facial expressions and read each other. So our eyes truly are, the window to our soul. So, yeah.
I haven't heard. Love that.
Yeah. Okay, so the second thing, which I promised to share, which we can practice right away, is to intentionally look for ways to show up to be empathic.
Yeah.
So, and I mean like small, strange ways. You can just be the first person to open the door, even if you're in a rush.
Yeah.
You can be in the lineup at the grocery store. Okay, so you have fewer things. Or you might want to let somebody ahead of you if you feel that they're in a rush. When you're on the highway, you let somebody who's in the mood to pass you and don't get like all road rage about it. Those are small ways, but then, as you develop the practice of empathy, you realize how good it feels.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, my life as a human being, like I'm a work in progress. There's still things that I'm working on, but I'm an infinitely happier person because of the empathy journey that I've been on, because I've had the opportunity to practice empathy. So I would just say to anybody watching, like today, look for some way that you can be empathic and start putting that into practice.
Yeah, thank you for that, because the examples you gave just there, they're kind of acts of kindness too. The examples you gave earlier on, I think, are brilliant as well. So when someone triggers you, and we're quick to judge, and that's human as well. We've evolved to survive. So if there's something that makes us feel that we're threatened at a subconscious level, we're going to react and close down. So that's natural. So there's nothing wrong with us when we are quick to judge. We are quick to judge. But the important thing is to realize we're doing it. And just as you did in your 2 examples, to go, hang on, maybe they are. How are they feeling now? And then that changes the whole dynamic. So it could change for, an interaction that's going to be horrible. And you imagine that post office lady, you'll go out of there feeling awful and perhaps pass, if you weren't conscious, perhaps pass that on to the next person who's then got had a bad experience and passes that on to the next person, instead of you're feeling great because you've just had a human raw experience with another human. She's feeling great. She's probably gone home and been extra compassionate with his son who's sick, even though she's tired, and done something about it. And in the second example, when that lady actually changed her life, I mean, this is the difference that we can make just by changing instead of reacting. Just thinking, why are they reacting like this? I wonder what's going on for them. Let me take a moment to put some empathy on and see, what do I
and instead of seeing that as like, oh my God, that takes so much energy, and like, will I have that capacity? Very much in line again with the spirit and the vision of your summit, is just to understand that our brain evolved over time too. And we started with the reptilian brain, the amygdala in the back of towards our neck, which just reacted to fight or flight, right? And then we developed our limbic brain, which gave us all sorts of cues about are we in danger? So, you know, the example is, you know, back on the savannas, the saber-toothed tiger, like, okay, we got to fight or flight, right? Now it's about taxes or about what somebody said on social media that kind of triggers us. But we also have, thankfully, the neocortex, which is like, you know, behind our eyes. And if we decide that we want to be all that we're capable of being, let's remember that we have this amazing part of our brain that allows us to really question our thoughts. Like, is this about me?
No.
You know, and to get into a quiet place and to choose purposeful empathy on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Well, I really appreciate you and your work in the world. I'm very excited about your book coming out. And I'm really grateful that you have taken the time out to join us here and share with us your wisdom and these tools that can make a huge difference, not only for us, but in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sally. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And obviously, if anybody's interested in learning more about purposeful empathy, they can find me at anitanowak.com and find me on YouTube, and would love to grow the empathic community.
Absolutely. We will be dropping all of the information below this video, so it'll be easy to find you. But thank you so much. You take care and chat soon.
Thank you, Sally.